Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about for loops. Now, for loops are also like loops in general, right? Which means that they also have some condition, and as long as that condition is true, they keep executing some specified block of code. So, what is so different about for loops? Why do we have a different kind of loop called for loops, right? Why not do everything with while loops? The reason is that for loops inherently implement the counter variable mechanics. So remember in our last video where we had to print hello world 5 times using a while loop, we used a separate variable called a counter variable, and we kept adding 1 to it whenever the body of the loop had run once. So for loops do things like this inherently. Okay, this is the reason that for loops are really useful in situations where we know the number of iterations of the loop beforehand. So if we know that we only have to run the loop 5 times or 10 times beforehand, then for loops are really useful in such situations. Okay, so now before discussing Python for loops, let's talk about for loops in C++. Okay, so for loops in C++ look something like this. The first word is for, which lets the compiler know that what you're going to be writing now is a for loop. Then after that, inside these parentheses, you write these 3 statements shown. Okay, we'll discuss what these 3 statements are in detail later. Then after these parentheses, there are some curly braces, right? And inside these curly braces, you write the body of the loop, the statements that you want to be executed again and again. So what are these 3 statements inside these parentheses of the for loop, right? Let's discuss those carefully. So the first statement here is a statement that declares and initializes a counter variable. So the counter variable here used is I. So this statement declares it and initializes it to some starting value. Here the starting value is 0. Okay. The second statement is the condition that the for loop uses. Okay. So this condition shown here is that I is less than equal to 10. So as long as this counter variable I is less than or equal to 10, the loop keeps running, and as soon as it becomes greater than 10, we move out of the loop onto the next part of the program. Okay. So this condition could be anything in general that uses the counter variable. Over here, it's shown as a simple relational formula like I is less than equal to 10, but you could put more complex conditions here too. The third part is the counter updation statement. So what this statement does is, after the loop has been run once, it updates the counter variable I based on what statement is written here. So the statement written here is I plus plus, right? This means that once the loop has been run once, it will increment the variable I by 1. But instead of writing I plus plus here, you could write different things too. You could write I plus is equal to 2, which means it would increment the value of I by 2 every time the loop is run once. Or you could also write something like I is equal to I into 2, which would double the value of I, and so on. Okay. So you can play around with these 3 statements however you want, as long as you keep the main basic structure of the for loop correct. So the first statement should be an initializing counter variable statement. The second statement inside the for loop should be the condition, and the third statement should be the counter updation. But generally, the way for loops are used in C++ are like this, that the 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 first statement that actually initializes and declares your counter variable is where you give some starting value for the counter variable. Okay, so here it's 0. Then in the condition, you give some ending value for the counter variable, and then the updation statement is just a simple increment statement. Usually it is just I plus plus. So what this kind of a loop does is that it runs the loop first when I is equal to 0, then it'll increment I by 1, so I will become 1 now, and it'll run the loop again. Then it will increment I by 1 again, so I will become 2, and it'll run the loop again, and so on till I becomes greater than 10. Okay, greater than this end value, and then it will move out of the loop. So that's how for loops are usually used in C++ and in programming in general. Okay. Now let's discuss Python for loops. So Python for loops are inherently different from for loops in other languages like C++ or Java. Okay. The reason for this is that Python for loops are actually meant for something else. Python for loops are meant to iterate over elements of a sequence or a group. Okay. So if you have a sequence of some elements and you want to pick elements from it one by one, okay, so you pick the first element and you want to use this in your loop, in your loop's body, and then you want to pick the second element and use that in your loop's body, and so on. So this is what Python for loops are meant for. Okay, so the syntax for this is really simple. It's something like this. The first word here is for, which lets the computer know that what you're going to write is a for loop. Okay. The second word here, L, stands for element. Okay. It's actually a variable name. So you can use any variable name here. I've used L to represent elements. Okay. Then we write in, after which we write the variable name of the sequence or the group that we want to iterate over. Okay. So what's going to happen now in this for loop is that the first element from the sequence sec is going to be stored in the variable L. Okay. So the first element in the sequence sec is going to be assigned to the variable L, and that is going to be the value of L for the body of the loop in that iteration. Then after the first iteration is done, in the next iteration, the value of L is going to be the second element in the sequence sec. Okay, so that is going to be used in the body of the loop. Then the value of L is going to be the third element of the sequence sec, and so on. Okay, till we cover all the elements of the sequence sec. Now all this is fine, right? It makes sense, kind of, but not really, because what are elements and what are sequence or a group? We've never heard these terms in our programming journey before, right? We might have actually. So let's see an example. So let's say that I want to iterate over characters in a string. Okay. What this basically means is that I'll be given some string, say S, and I want to uh, pick characters in that string one by one and print them on different lines. Okay. So how would I do this? Remember how when we were discussing strings, we said that a string is actually a sequence of characters. So to iterate over characters, i.e. elements in a string, i.e. a sequence, this task can be done easily using for loops in Python. Okay. The way to do this is just use the syntax that we discussed before. So for ch, which is a variable name that stands for the character we are choosing from the sequence of characters, i.e. the string, in S, and S is the string. Okay. So for ch in S, and then we put two colons, after which we write the body of the for loop indented, print ch. Okay. So what this does is, if we have a string, say ABC, so the first character of S is A, right? that character A is going to be stored in the variable ch. Then it's going to move to the body of the loop. So we'll print the character A first. Then in the next iteration of the loop, ch is going to become the ch is going to take up the value b now, which is the next element in the sequence of characters, or the next element in the string s, right? So then again we go into the body of the loop and b is printed. And finally, the last element in the sequence of characters or the string s is c. So that character c is going to be assigned to this variable ch, and we're going to move into the body of the loop where that character c is going to be printed out. Okay, so this is what Python for loops are actually meant for and actually used in, right? So a string is just one kind of uh, a place where Python for loops are used, but there are a lot of other data structures and groups of elements that we'll discuss much later where Python for loops become really important. Okay, so that's all good, but what if I want to use for loops in Python the way for loops are used in C++, right? The original way, so that I can uh, inherently implement counters into my loop, right? So this can be done using the range function. Now, this is a new function that we are going to learn about right now. So let's have a look at it. So the range function is a function that takes in three inputs, st, en, and update shown here, these three variable inputs, and all of these are integers, okay? And using these three inputs, it returns a sequence of numbers, okay? So what exactly is this sequence of numbers? The range function returns an arithmetic progression sequence, okay, starting from the first number st and with the common difference update. Now, it returns the sequence till before the number en, okay. So if you don't know what an arithmetic progression sequence means, it's actually really simple to understand. Basically, the first number of the sequence will be the starting number st, okay. Then to find the next number of the sequence, we just add this common difference update to st and we get the next number of the sequence. Then to find the next number of the sequence, we add update to this new number and get the next number of the sequence, and so on. Okay. So range returns this arithmetic progression sequence till before the number en. Okay. So to really understand this range function, let's look at a few examples of it. So the first example here is range 324. Okay. So the sequence that it would return is shown below it. Okay. It would start from 3, then add 4 to 3 to get the next number in the sequence, which is 7. Then add 4 to 7 to get the next number in the sequence, which is 11. Then we get 15, then 19. And here the sequence stops, because if we add 4 to it now, we'll go ahead of this number en that is given to it, which is 20, right? So that was one of the examples. Now, en is a required input variable for the range function. So you always have to give a value for en, okay? But st and update have default values, okay? So let's say that you write something like range 20, 4. What uh, 20 is going to be now is en and 4 is going to be update, okay? And the value for st is going to be used as the default value, which is 0, okay? So the sequence that we'll get then will start from 0, then we'll get 4 by adding 4 to it, then we'll get 8, 12 and 16, okay? And then we won't get 20 in the sequence because the sequence has to end before en. So it has to end before 20. That means it can't end at 20. Okay. So the sequence will end at 16. Similarly, the default value for the update input variable is 1. Okay. So if I don't write 4 also, and I write something like range 20, here both st and update are taking their default values, which are 0 and 1, and this 20 is what the function considers as the value of en. Okay, so the sequence that I'll get is 0, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on till 19. Okay, so that's all about the range function. Now let's see how this range function allows us to use the Python for loop as similar to for loops in C++. Okay, so the way to do that is to write code like this. So we write something like for I, where I is a counter variable. Okay, so for I in range st comma en comma update, then we put two colons and then we write the body of the loop. Okay, now what is basically happening here is that range st comma en comma update is still returning a sequence, right? I is going to take values in this sequence one by one. Okay, this is the general idea we discussed about Python for loops, right? That idea is still followed. The only difference is that the sequence we're using here is generated by this range function. Okay, so how does this work similar to the C++ for loop? Okay, let's see this in detail. Now these two pieces of code shown here are equivalent. Okay, the reason for this is that in the Python code, what's going to happen is that range st comma en comma update is going to generate a arithmetic progression sequence, right? So the first value in that sequence will be st, then the second value will be st plus update, then the third value will be st plus update, and so on, right? Till before en, right? So I will take all these values one by one. First it will take the value st, then the value st plus update, and so on, right? In C++, here if you see in the inside the parenthesis of for, the first statement is int I is equal to st. So this statement initializes the value of I to st. That means the first value of I will be st when it enters the loop, right? Now after one iteration of the loop, the next value that I takes will be uh, increased by update, right? Because the update statement here is I plus is equal to update. So the new value of I will be st plus update, right? Then the body of the loop will be executed once more, and then again in the new iteration the value of I will be updated once more. So the new value of y will be st plus update, right? And this will keep happening till I is less than en. Okay, so clearly in both of these pieces of code, I takes exactly the same values, right? In exactly the same order. This is why both of these pieces of code are equivalent. So the C++ for loop shown here can be implemented in Python using the range function like this. Now that we've learned all about for loops in Python and how to use them, let's solve the same example, print hello world 5 times using for loops. Now, what would be the algorithm for this? If we want to use for loops, the algorithm will be much simplified, right? Because now all we'll have to do is run that loop 5 times, and we can do this easily using for loops, right? So the only part of our algorithm is that we want to implement a for loop that runs 5 times in total. Okay, so it should run 5 times in total, and in the body of the loop we'll write print hello world. So that's all that the algorithm is now, and we can move on to implementing this. Let's try to implement our code on the online Python compiler. Now basically what we need to do in our code is write a for loop that runs 5 times, right? So if I write a Python for loop, that means uh, for, oh sorry, not there, here. So for I in range. Now the input values that I have to give to range here, which is st, en and update, these values should be such that my for loop runs exactly 5 times, right? So how do I do that? You can do any combination of these values such that the for loop runs for exactly 5 times, or that um, that is the sequence that is given by range has exactly 5 values in it, okay? But the easiest one would be to start I at 0, so the starting value of I will be 0 and the update will be 1, okay? So I will be increased by 1 every time, and because we want the because we want 5 values in range, so en should be 5, okay? Let's just confirm that this actually works, okay? So what will happen is the range given by range 0 comma 5 comma 1 will be 0 1 2 3 and 4, right? And after that there won't be anything else in the sequence because the sequence is only till before en, and en is 5 here. So 0 1 2 3 and 4, these are exactly 5 values, right? So that means I will take all these 5 values one by one, which means that this for loop will run for 5 times exactly. So we also discussed that the default values for start and update are 0 and 1, right? So we can also skip writing these values 0 and 1 and just write for I in range 5. This is equivalent to that, okay? Now this pattern for I in range n is a really common pattern and you should be familiar with it, okay? This should be at the tip of your fingers. So if any time you want to run a loop for n iterations, all you need to do in Python is write for I in range n, okay? So we've done that. Now what do we write in the body here? All we need to write is print hello world, right? That's it. So that's it. That's all our algorithm said, right? That make a loop that runs 5 times exactly, and in the body write print hello world. So if I run the code now, it should work, right? And you can clearly see that it does work, okay? So that's all for the implementation of this using for loops, and I hope it was clear how we practically use for loops in Python. So yeah, that's all for this video. Thank you for watching, and if you have any doubts, please feel free to leave them in the comments.